Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing a part 5 of 5 for the top 50 fantasy books of the last 5 years. And just like with part 4, because we have now reached the end of this video series, I'm not going to give a long explanation as to the specifics behind it. I'm just going to jump straight in, but if you want a little bit more explanation, then I will have parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 linked in the description bar down below. Kicking it off though with the stuff that's a little bit more on the personal side, we actually are going to have something that sounds a little bit happier than what a lot of the previous parts have gotten into. So, of course, 2020 through 2023 were very challenging as I lost two of the people in my life that I was the closest to, my father and my grandmother. But I do think that 2024 was probably the first time that I really felt like I had settled into my life again. And I know that it's going to be different for each individual person, and it never really leaves. The grieving process, it kind of occasionally comes back up. You're reminded of things. You're finding yourself sad on random days, or maybe very specific days in the case of, for my life, because I lost my dad. His birthday was in July. So June is Father's Day, July was his birthday, and August is the month that he died. So that whole stretch, on top of me already complaining about how hot it is where I live for that stretch of time, on top of already being miserable because I can't go outside and I can't, go for a walk to try to get out of my head. On top of all of that, there's the fact that that stretch of time, memory-wise, is quite challenging, and people are bringing up dads all the time. And I've gotten to a point now, though, where yes, it's sad, but also now it's almost more bittersweet, because I think it's much easier to reflect and have a little bit of sense of I can be happy again thinking about my dad. It's still painful, but I feel like the joyful parts of my memories of him are a little bit more on the stronger side, I would say, than the parts that are painful. And there was something that a friend of mine from high school, something his dad said, because this friend of mine I had known since I was a little kid, and thus his dad knew me for many years of my life. And when my friend was married and I went to his wedding, and his dad was catching up, asking me like, oh, how have you been? And I was telling him, because at the time it wasn't too long since my dad had passed away, and so I was letting him know, and he told me my dad passed away decades ago. I don't remember the exact number, but he said he was my best friend, and there's not a day that goes by when I don't think about him. And at the time, because the pain was still a lot fresher, when I heard that a little bit, I was like, well, that sucks, because it'd be nice to be able to go through a day without feeling so sad all the time. But I think it's true, and also now it's not something I look at in a negative way because of the fact that it's not as difficult anymore. But I do think that if you have lost a loved one, if you will lose a loved one in the future, it doesn't sound like a good thing to hear something like that you think about them every day. And sometimes you think about it and you're just upset because you're like, man, why can't they still be here? Especially if you feel like you lost a person too soon, which I think is how we feel about most people we lose, but I'm sure you know what I mean. But I do think now, I think that it's true, but once you get past the most painful part of the grieving process, then now it's something that actually you're comforted by, because it's almost like there's a part of you that knows, even though they're not physically there with you anymore, you aren't forgetting them. And that in its own way is a nice way to help with the healing, I think. And I know all of this sounds cliche or cheesy or maybe a little over the top, but I would say that 2024, in that sense, it was starting to finally turn around. And I think when it comes to my grandmother, who I centered a lot of the topic of the grieving process last time on talking about losing her, but I did mention that with my grandmother, she had dementia, and it was a much longer decline than what happened with my dad. So I think with my grandma, there was a sense of peace in knowing like, oh, she's finally not struggling anymore. So I think it was a little bit easier to get through that. And I'd already started the process with the loss of my father. So I think it kind of sort of all came together, and it made it easier in a sense. Of course, it was challenging in its own ways. But regardless, the part that's kind of on the happier side is that I definitely think things have gotten easier. It does get easier. So if you're in the thick of it right now, I know how hard it is, but it does get better, especially if you have a support system. So reach out to people, even if you're not reaching out to talk to them about how you feel necessarily. You just reach out to people because maybe you just need to laugh. Maybe you just need to go watch a movie, or maybe you just want to catch up, and it just helps to be around another person. Definitely take advantage of that. Or sometimes you're not going to want to, maybe it's the weekend, you have the day off, and you just want to do absolutely nothing. Sometimes just start the day, just get dressed, just get dressed. And I would tell my mom, because I think my mom was very worried about me, I would tell my mom, I have mailbox clothes, is what I would call them, which is I would at least put on an outfit that's nice enough, because for a lot of us that work from home and we don't have to dress nice, I was like, I at least put on an outfit that if I needed to check the mail, I would not be embarrassed if I was seen by neighbors. So just that process of getting dressed. So if you need to run errands, or if you need to go somewhere, and sometimes just going and walking around, even if you're all by yourself, just to be around other people, which I get it. If you're a homebody and you're like, I don't really want to be around anybody, sometimes it's not helpful, but sometimes it's good to just get out, get some fresh air, go just try to resemble normal life again, normal whatever that is for you, and it does help. Every little bit helps. So just know that you're not alone, even though it can feel like it. Other people absolutely understand, and even if they don't, a lot of people want to be there for you, so let them be there for you. But as far as the charity that I wanted to mention, so the past 4 that we've talked about, because for each of these I've mentioned a charity that I feel like in some way relates to my grandma or my dad or both. So the past ones, we have the Phoenix Children's Hospital, the World Wildlife Fund, Doctors Without Borders, and A New Leaf. And for today, I wanted to mention the National Park Foundation, because I've mentioned before, my grandma came from Cuba to America, and I just think one of the best things about America are our national parks. And I know my grandma appreciated beautiful places, but then also my dad, born and raised here, and that was one thing that he just loved. I mentioned when I talked about World Wildlife Fund that he kind of instilled in me a love for wildlife and for trees of all things, and just the environment, and how lucky so many of us are to be able to go to beautiful places. And thankfully, we're able to do so because of the hard work of a lot of individuals to protect these places and to maintain them. So if you want to help out with that, I'll have that organization linked, and I'll have all the other organizations linked as well, in case there's one that maybe speaks to you a little bit stronger. But again, a huge thank you to everyone for, I know this is a little bit different than probably what a lot of people were expecting when we did part 1, but thank you so much for sticking with me in this video series. I know for some of you, you're more interested in the books, so we'll jump into that now, and we'll start with the polls, but I just really want to emphasize how much I appreciate all of you being here, all of the supportive messages, or even just sticking around to watch videos when I was struggling and making this now my full-time job through the middle of a pandemic, and after losing my dad and not having the job I'd had for 10 years at that point. So I really appreciate so much all of the support that all of you have given, or just chatting about books. So let's officially segue into doing that. So we'll start with the polls. I mentioned in part 4 that I thought it'd be fun to have all the polls lined up so that you can see, of the 4 books that were options each of these given years, you can see the results, you can see which ones had the closest of results, which ones won by a landslide. And for the year of 2024, the winner did win by quite a lot. So the 4 options were The Bright Sword, The Tainted Cup, A Sorceress Comes to Call, and The Warm Hands of Ghosts. And The Tainted Cup really took it away with 57% of the votes. Sorceress Comes to Call was at 29%. The Bright Sword was 6%. Warm Hands of Ghosts was 8%. But I know for some of you it was a tough decision, but it went to The Tainted Cup. This year, I think I definitely lined up with your votes a little bit more than 2023, because 2023 I reversed some of it. But I know for myself, I think that The Tainted Cup and A Sorceress Comes to Call were more to my liking. I did like A Sorceress Comes to Call a little bit more. I do think, though, it's important to note that A Sorceress Comes to Call is a standalone, whereas The Tainted Cup is the first in a series. A Sorceress Comes to Call being a standalone, it's complete. I loved one of the protagonists so much. I thought she was awesome. I thought it was a fun, kind of dark, grim fairy tale feel. I really enjoyed it. So it did beat out, for me, The Tainted Cup. But then I think I think I might maybe reverse the Bright Sword and the Warm Hands of Ghosts. I think I liked the Bright Sword a little more than the Warm Hands of Ghosts, but pretty close to the... When it came to the top two, I would swap those. When it came to the bottom two, I'd swap them. But overall, I would say I'm pretty close to what the overall feeling was for those four. Now for the winner of the winners, I had a poll where I took each of the winners of those 5 years and I pitted them against each other to see which one could be declared the winner of the last 5 years. And I know it's not the most in-depth way to get these results, but I couldn't have it on the YouTube community tab because it only allows for 4 options. So I did share the link on the community tab, and if you would like to still vote on that, I'll share what the results are currently, but then I'll leave some time after you've seen this video in case you didn't see that post and you want to go vote. Currently, the winner of the last 5 years was The Will of the Many. My vote was Shadow of the Gods. I really enjoyed Shadow of the Gods of the 5. So if you are, because I always try to be aware of the fact that sometimes people watch videos while they're driving and whatnot. So I'll read off to you what the options were. It was The Tainted Cup, The Will of the Many, Babel, Shadow of the Gods, and Piranesi. I think for me, if I were to order them, I would have Shadow of the Gods, then I think The Tainted Cup, and then The Will of the Many, and then Babel, and then Piranesi. I know so many people love Piranesi. I've talked about before that I definitely think it's an experience very different from anything really I've read before, and I really appreciate that. I also really always appreciate when authors go for it and they take a chance, they do something different and creative. However, thematically, I wasn't all that connected to it. And I thought it was saying something different for the majority of the story, and I found that so moving. And then when it turned out it was saying something very different, I was like, oh, I liked what I thought it was saying more than what it's actually saying. Or I should say I connected to that more than what it turned out to actually be saying. So it's more of a it's not you, it's me feeling. But yeah, Shadow of the Gods was my pick. But currently the winner is The Will of the Many. And I'm still really surprised by that because I think a lot of the best of this story is yet to come, and I feel like the first book had, I said it in part 3, I think it was, it kind of had the Gary Sue thing a little bit, and it made it kind of predictable sometimes. But I still think that there's a lot, of course, that's really great about it. The concepts and the whole idea of people's will being extracted is so fascinating, and I'm just really eager to see what the author does with all of that. Officially jumping, though, into the tier ranking part, The Lost Story. This one is in tier 5. I really appreciated the themes within this, and the setup, if you don't know, you're kind of looking at these 2 young men that when they were boys, they went missing, and then mysteriously they reappeared after everybody thought that they definitely would have died because of the length of time they were gone. And then in present day, there is somebody who, her sister went missing years and years ago. These 2 young men have kind of made a name for themselves, or at least one of them in particular, for finding missing children. And so our character thinks, okay, I'm going to try to recruit this guy and hire him to help me find my sister who went missing years ago. And maybe they know a little bit more about her sister than they should know, but they also don't seem to want to tell her about it, and you're trying to figure out why. The Wishing Game by the same author worked so much more for me. Both of them lean into, at times, sort of almost more cutesy storytelling, and that can be great. It kind of fits within cozy, I would say. But this one, some of the themes that you get are quite heavy, and it's not that you can't do heavy themes in cozy fantasy, so I don't want to give the wrong impression with that. But sometimes I think certain themes, we need to give them a level of weight that sometimes the cutesy can almost take away from. Not always, of course, but in this case, I did feel like that was kind of what I would describe as happening, at least in my when it came to my taste. I felt like that's a little bit what happened, even though I appreciate a lot of what it was saying. But as such, that's why it is in tier 5. Luckily, we didn't have any in tier 6 today. There was one year that kind of took the cake for tier 6. Anyway, though, now going up to tier 4, The Bright Sword and The Warm Hands of Ghosts. With The Bright Sword, you have the collection of different characters within the King Arthur tale that are less talked about. And then we're diving into each of their perspectives over the course of the story. So it's almost like a collection of short stories, in a sense, that are all bridged together through one narrative in the end. But while I really liked the idea of getting these individual stories and having them often be characters that, even though in the King Arthur tale they're seen as the outliers, you can apply a lot of what made them outliers within that story to present day, and you can really resonate with why so many of them are seen as set apart, even though they shouldn't be forced to be seen that way. So I liked certain tales, you could say, more than others, but overall, I just didn't really find that narrative that tied them all together really made for a story that overall kind of, worked for my taste. I think I think maybe we could have done a little bit more to connect them in a stronger way, and I almost don't know that we needed to have it be based around the King Arthur tale. I understand why the author did it, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that they even had kind of an introduction talking about the different iterations of the King Arthur tale, and as a result, I appreciated their take on it and what they were going for, but we've just seen it so many times at this point, and I think I would have been more compelled by if we had taken any one of those specific stories and we'd actually done an entire book. Not that I would want them to be within the same series necessarily, but I think we could have done just a whole story with the same concepts for each of the characters that they're dealing with, but been able to dig a little bit deeper and then not relied on the King Arthur tale for more of what I think, not saying that we were trying to get a cash grab or anything like that, but it does kind of go out to people a little bit stronger when you hear King Arthur retelling, except for with the characters that most of us don't talk about. That's a little different than just something totally and wholly original, but I think I would have preferred something wholly original. And then with the Warm Hands of Ghosts, once again, I feel like a lot of the ones from this year, I'm on repeat being like, I appreciated what they were going for, but it just didn't work for me, which is kind of true once again with the Warm Hands of Ghosts. This is one where I understood why we didn't go as in depth with, I guess you could say, I found it was trying to show and not tell, with especially one of our characters who I think she has essentially shut off her emotions and she just kind of is going day to day. And it reads for a while very, very dry, and it almost seems like she has hardly any personality. But I think she's almost in survival mode, where if she lets herself feel a little bit more, then everything's going to come crashing down and she's going to have to process everything she went through, because she was a nurse during a world war and she has seen some really awful things. And on top of all of this, she's lost her parents and her brother has been pronounced dead and she thinks he's just missing. So she decides to go back and try to find him. But being a nurse, she is still having to treat people who have horrible wounds, and she's just kind of surrounded by violence all the time. So I understand why the narrative was on the, quote, drier side. But I also just found overall that I feel like there's a way to do that where at some point you kind of see a little bit into the character a little bit more. And I almost felt like all of the emotional development of the character, or maybe even just the reveals, it almost felt like I was putting that onto the character as opposed to the narrative itself giving you these moments through how she's acting or how she's expressing herself. And it could just be that that was my take and maybe other people would completely disagree. I also thought the narrative with her brother was the more interesting part of the story, and I actually wish we had maybe spent more time with him and less time with her, because I thought there was way more going on with his plot line. It just ultimately didn't quite hit the way I was hoping and the way I thought it was going to. Moving now to tier 3, we have Map of the Otherlands and A Song to Drown Rivers. I say so often that typically the books that stay with me the longest, that hit me the hardest, are the ones that are more thematically driven, or are the ones that have a little bit more, quote unquote, to say. And I feel like I sound like a hypocrite a little bit by having the Bright Sword and the Warm Hands of Ghosts in tier 4 and then these two in tier 3, because it's not that they didn't have anything to say, of course. I think most books have something a little bit to say. But these two were, I would say, a little bit more compulsively readable or fun than the other two, which I feel like were really hitting on some important things. But the execution of said important things was what brought it a little bit down for me, whereas I feel like the execution of these two stories brought it up a little bit. And this is why I always talk about reading as so subjective, because sometimes the writing in a book is exquisite, but maybe the story doesn't hit as hard, or maybe thematically it's not really saying a whole lot, or maybe the characters are really dull, or maybe actually the plot is really cliche. And other times you can have the most innovative, interesting, plot line that transforms the genre, but the characters are all idiots and it's really hard to root for them and you want to bang your head against the wall. There's just so many pieces about what makes things come together as a whole. And then on top of all of that, it's how we connect with it and how we end up finding that it connects with what we're looking for. And then add that to what we've read already. So does something feel unique because we haven't read anything like it, even though maybe other things like it already exist? Does it feel cliche because we've read other things that are similar? Even if it's doing the story as a whole really well, if we've seen it before, then we're like, eh. So anyway, I feel like all of what I'm describing is illustrated perfectly by having these two in tier 3 and the previous two in tier 4. But Map of the Otherlands, I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book in this series. Then A Song to Drown Rivers, I actually really liked the intrigue side of things and the gray morality. I was surprised because the author did have a few moments where the book could have gone one way, and instead she really hit hard by actually taking you a much darker direction, and I appreciated that. I think we could have done a little bit more with this. I actually think maybe this could have been a duology, but as a standalone, I still thought that that served the story just fine. I just think I would have maybe wanted a little bit more out of certain parts of it, but I enjoyed both of these quite a bit. And then after that, we have The Tainted Cup in tier 2. In previous tier rankings, I've had The Tainted Cup in tier 3. It just depends on what I'm kind of putting it up against, and also the longer it's been with me, my feelings about it. I feel like the longer it's been with me, the more I'm like, it really is unlike anything else, and it's so fun. And it's such a cool genre blender. I think when I went into this, and maybe a lot of you felt similarly, when I went into this, the marketing very much was hitting home, that is Sherlock Holmes in a fantasy world. And as a result, I was like, okay, it's going to be a cool murder mystery. And I thought that would be the focus, and that the world building would just be kind of an in the background thing. I was not expecting the world building to be, oh, my dishwasher's going off if you hear that little song. So sorry. When we got this dishwasher, that little song makes me so happy. So I get really, I don't know if you could hear it. If you couldn't hear it, then I'm just moving around in my chair like an idiot. But back to The Tainted Cup. I wasn't expecting the world building to be what it was, and it ended up being one of the shining parts of the story. It's so cool, and I can't wait to see what's done with it, and especially given the name of the series itself. I have a feeling that we're going to get a lot more with some of the things that are hinted at in book 1. And then last, I did put A Sorceress Comes to Call in tier 1 because I really had fun with that book. And like I said, when we were doing our overview of the polls, I loved that one perspective so much. She's just kind of I have my friends, I don't really need to deal with anybody else, I like my life well enough, but also I'm getting a little up there and my knee really bugs me, and she was just great. That's not a good way to describe her, but she was just somebody who, she's happy with life, she accepts life for what it is, even though she's kind of grumbly sometimes, and she looks out for other people, and she's strong in her own way. Not strong in I'm really good at fighting necessarily, but she has a lot of grit to her, and I just thought she was great. But she's also very compassionate, and she's also able to assess when something doesn't look like it's going right, and she cares for the people that are negatively impacted by the things that she looks at and thinks something's wrong there, and she wants to look out for the people that would be victims of some kind of abuse of some sort or some kind of manipulation. She's able to assess scenes pretty well and then try to figure out how to navigate them in a way that protects the victim. In this case, the victim is another perspective in the story. It was really well done, and I also feel like the way that it showcased how somebody can be impacted by abuse, especially as a child, I thought that was really exceptional. And then it doesn't sound like that would be the case given what I just said, but also it's a pretty funny book because I feel like T. Kingfisher always is able to insert her humor in and in ways that are a lot of fun. And then there's creepy aspects to the story as well, and a definite sense of danger as you are reading. So I had a really good time with it when it comes to a genre blender, because I was just praising The Tainted Cup for being that. When it comes to a genre blender, I definitely feel like it mixes fantasy and kind of that grim fairy tale sort of feeling with the almost thriller feeling as well, a little bit of horror also, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I might have actually had 51 books on the list if I were to count a little more carefully, because originally I think I didn't have The Warm Hands of Ghosts on there, but then I put it in later. So this might technically be the top 51 books of the last 5 years, but my top tier I'm sure most of you can see it, but I'll just go through that. We had The Trouble with Peace. Might have been my favorite one. Anyway, The Trouble with Peace, Empire of Gold, Rhythm of War, Nettle and Bone, which I think maybe belongs in tier 2. I don't know. I need to reread it. Anyway, Fragile Threads of Power, and A Sorceress Comes to Call. And then for tier 2, we had Black Sun, Bone Shard Daughter, Shadow of the Gods, Witch's Heart, She Who Became the Sun, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, Legends and Lattes, Keikayi, A River Enchanted, Last Tale of the Flower Bride, Amina Al-Sarafi, Bookshops and Bone Dust, Encyclopedia of Fairies, and The Tainted Cup. So those were the ones that were on the higher end for me. It would be really fun to compare this to if I were to actually take books that weren't nominated and bring them into the equation, which ones would kind of beat out the ones that were on the Goodreads Choice Awards nominees. And the reason I pulled from there is because I wanted to try to gauge what collectively people who are fans of fantasy determined to be the, quote, best of the genre. So if I were to pick my own, though, for example, I would have Blood Over Briarhaven in here, and I would definitely have that in top tier. You know what I mean? There's just different books that weren't even nominated that I would want up on this list. But anyway, let me know your favorite book of the last 5 years. Let me know your favorite from this list of 50 or 51. Let me know your favorite from these, but then also let me know if there's something that wasn't ever nominated. Let me know what your favorite has been from that. But anyway, thanks again so much, as I already said, for following along on this little progression. And now that we've finished this, we are going to be doing some Goodreads predictions, and then we'll be reacting to the ones that get nominated this year. We'll also maybe do some overviews of what's been nominated in case something pops up out of nowhere. Maybe I'll try to give it a read or something. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.